we even talking about this topic? Well, because it's really important. Why is it important? Well, let's face it, up to 90% of innovation is created by inventors in businesses, in universities, in various research organizations. They're not independent inventors. These are people who have other jobs. So a utilitarian argument says, filing patent applications, invention disclosures, it takes time. So why do people do it? How do we reward people for putting in that extra effort? Well, that's what recognition and reward mechanisms are about. Also, we've got to recognize that there are statutory requirements in particular countries which require that we provide recognition and reward for people, most notably Germany. But it's not exclusive to Germany. But regardless of what way you go about this, the key thing is you've got to align it with your overall IP strategy. In other words, are you risk averse? Are you trying to promote a risky environment, etc.? And more particularly, align it with the culture of the organization and the culture you want to achieve. Financial remuneration is probably, well, the simplest in many ways. At least in principle it is. And indeed, it's probably the most widely used mechanism of rewarding people. But in practice, it's perhaps not as easy as it might first appear. Why is that? Well, there's lots of considerations. For example, how much do you pay? When do you pay? And to whom do you pay? So for example, looking at how much, well, okay, how do you compare with your competitors? Particularly if we're looking at highly mobile engineers and scientists, they will be checking out what's happening with their competitors. So you've got to bear that in mind. When? Okay, do you do it at filing, invention disclosure, grant, official action? It's up to you. To whom? Okay, why do we assume that invention is restricted to engineers and scientists? Innovation can happen anywhere in an organization. So in other words, are you only going to reward engineers and scientists, or are you going to reward everyone in the organization? Again, that's up to you. While financial rewards are probably the most widely used method of, rewarding innovation, it's not the only way. Maslow shows us that self-affirmation is a huge driver of individuals. And I suppose, personally, I think it's probably one of the most significant drivers of creative individuals. So reflecting on that, what other methods can you use to reward people? Well, lots of industries or companies use different approaches, but one approach is to use plaques. A plaque which reflects the front page of a patent application, or a pin to denote that I'm an inventor, yay! Dinners, FaceTime with the senior exec. All these things are brilliant methods. Just pick one. Oh yes, unfortunately I do. It's not so much in terms of the main idea of the purpose of recognition and reward mechanisms. These are great, these are positive messages, but rather they tend to go wrong in terms of their implementation. In other words, how you do it. If you do it badly, you do it clumsily, well, you'll end up with egg on your face. The sort of things that go wrong are if people feel that other people are being rewarded unfairly or more than other people, or if they feel that the message is unclear as to why they're being rewarded or the purpose of the reward mechanism, or if perhaps they feel that it's not clear to them how they can access those rewards. All of these things contribute to potentially bad feelings or even possibly divisiveness within an organization. So it's, yes, please do go ahead and reward people, but do it right. Oh yes, there are big differences. Again, not so much in terms of their intent. The intent is to reward innovation, yes. But the differences again come down to the implementation. And it's not just about in terms of budget. Of course, budget is a big thing, but it's also again how you go about disseminating that budget and how you manage that process. So for example, in some countries where there is a statutory requirement, there's very elaborate procedures for managing this. And if you have very large portfolios, which you tend to see with large corporates, then it can require a specific division of the company itself to implement this. SMEs may not have the budget, but more importantly, they may not have the resource in terms of time or administrative facility to implement a full reward system. So that's where sometimes SMEs can be a little more imaginative in their approach and perhaps even give the inventors more choice on what rewards they want. That's a $10 million question. Well, okay, rather than giving you specific guidelines, what if I give you a few examples? You can work from that. So, say you want to file a patent thicket. In other words, you want to cover yourself with lots and lots of patents, even if they're not necessarily directly related to the product you're actually selling. The idea is to try and exclude competitors who might want to try and work around. In that case, you're going to be filing lots and lots of patent applications, and you're going to have a big budget. And it means that you're going to probably accept a very large percentage of the invention disclosures made by the inventors. Okay, so that has an effect, not just in terms of your patent filing budget, but also in terms of your remuneration, if you're doing financial remuneration. It means that a large percentage of people who are submitting invention disclosures will be remunerated if you take that approach. But if, by another token, you decide you want to have a much more focused approach, you want to focus your patent application specifically on the product you're selling. In that case, a lot of the invention disclosures are likely to not necessarily be accepted because the criteria that you use for choosing them for whether to go ahead with a patent application will be determined by the focus of your product. So that means that a quite considerable percentage of your inventions and your inventors may not necessarily be remunerated, particularly if your remuneration or your financial remuneration is focused at the time of filing a patent application. I'll give you a typical lawyer's answer. It depends. That doesn't sound very useful, does it? But actually, it's very right. It does depend. It depends on the individual. And ultimately, this is what it's all about. It's about rewarding inventors, their diversity, their creativity. It's what makes them wonderful. So, okay, you might think financial remuneration. Yes, absolutely. We all like a bit of money. Why not? But you know what? It's not necessarily the only driver for people. Some people love the idea of walking around with a pin saying, I'm a master inventor. They love the idea of other people in the office coming up and saying, yay, well done. That's great. That works for them. Other people, as I say, they might want to have FaceTime with the CEO or something like this. Okay, you need to have buy-in from the CEO to do that. But, you know, some organizations, they take the view that they'd like to let the inventor to decide for themselves. So, for example, if you have a very rigid policy, which I can understand you might need in a larger organization to promote harmonization, but if it's very rigid, then, for example, say you say, oh, we're going to give an inventor an iPad every time they file a patent application. But we know there are certain inventors who produce lots of inventions. They're recurrent inventors. They're brilliant people. But say an inventor has produced 3 great inventions that led on to patent applications. They suddenly find themselves with 3 iPads. It's not that useful, is it? So some organizations, what they do is they allow inventors, they give them a budget and they say, off you go. Pick whatever you want within that budget, within reason. Ultimately, though, it's got to be about recognizing the diversity of the individual and the drivers that drive those individual people. It's creativity, it's diversity. Embrace it.